Welcome everyone to today's session. My name is Emily and I am excited to be joining in with you tonight. I have some special guests and we will get started in a minute. I just want to make you aware of a few places before we get started. One, the questions toolbar at the bottom of your GoToWebinar control panel is a place for you to get all of your questions answered throughout the session. There is also a chat function, so make sure you take advantage of that so that you can share resources and discuss with your fellow educators tuning in. Additionally, there is a handout as a part of this webinar, so feel free to download that PDF. And if for some reason you can't access it, you'll have our contact information at the end to be able to follow up to receive all that information. So we will get started. Tonight's session is called Information Overload. It is following our newsela Media Literacy Week that occurred last week. We had a webinar with our content team that many of you joined into, and we're excited to be able to now address media literacy with one of our content partners, PBS NewsHour, as well as with a California educator and newsela teacher captain. So we're excited to be able to bring this session to you this evening. As I mentioned earlier, my name is Emily Lepkowski, and I am an educator specialist at newsela. Prior to joining the team, I was an elementary school ESL teacher in New York City, and I use newsela in my classroom as a tool to differentiate instruction and to also collaborate with the other classroom teachers in my school. And I am very excited to share that we have two guests as a part of this session, and so I will let Victoria and Liz introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Victoria Pasquantonio from PBS NewsHour. I'm their education editor, but for 13 years before that, I was a middle school and high school social studies teacher as well as English teacher.
Great, thank you for joining us. Liz?
And I'm Liz Ramos. I'm here joining in from California. I teach at Altaloma High School. Currently, I'm teaching AP Government and World History, and I love the newsela resources with students to help them practice literacy, and a big fan of the work with PBS with lessons in civics, and use them both in my classroom.
Right, so it's really wonderful that we have both of you on the line, and Liz, it's great that you're going to be able to share the best practices that are happening in your classroom, some of which you shared with me even happened today. So I'm really glad to have your insights tonight for our educator communities. So now that we know a little bit about you, I'd love to know a little bit more, or now that we know a little bit about our guests, I would love to know a little bit more about who's joining in. And so this is our first poll, and I'm going to launch that poll. Let us know about your classrooms. Tell us what perspective you're joining in from. All right, I'll give everyone just 5 more seconds. All right, so we have a large portion of teachers joining us from middle schools and high schools, but we also have elementary school teachers on the line, as well as educators that work with adults. And so definitely a diverse audience, and I'm excited to hear some of your questions and how they might differ depending on what angle you are addressing this topic from. All right, so on to our next poll that's a little bit more specific to what we are addressing tonight. I'm going to launch that, and I'll give you about 30 seconds to tell us your thoughts. About 5 more seconds. Make sure you tell us, share your insights. Great. Okay, so the clear winner here, it's a little bit of a tie between questioning and researching the accuracy of news and also source validity, making sure your students have an understanding of what is a valid source, how do they know the credibility, etc. And so I do hope that our discussion tonight will give you some strategies and practices that you can take back to your classroom to address these issues that definitely are coming up in these discussions that you're having on a daily basis with your students. No webinar would be organized if you didn't have an objective, and so this is what Victoria and Liz and myself are hoping you walk away from this discussion with, that you have some best practices and strategies that you can bring to your classroom in the coming weeks. So just before we get started and dive into the discussion, I wanted to share a little bit more about newsela for those of you who might be newer to newsela as a resource. What newsela is we're a nonfiction literacy tool. We partner with folks like the LA Times, Washington Post, Smithsonian, Guardian to publish articles at 5 different reading levels. And we, in the past, were really known for our news, but we have recently expanded to include a library of nonfiction, bringing educators access to primary sources, famous speeches, as well as myths and legends, all at 5 different reading levels. So we're up to 8 articles a day, and once those articles are on the site, they do not leave. And so tonight you will hear a little bit more about newsela and be able to learn some of the practices you can bring into your classroom using it. And now on to Victoria, who's going to share a little bit more about PBS NewsHour Extra.
All right, great. So PBS NewsHour Extra is the teacher classroom student website. It has lots of good resources on there, lesson plans, and a daily news story, as well as activities that normally are based on NewsHour content, often from the night before, so it's current for students and teachers. But there are a few other things that are kind of nice on there. And the first story I think you might be looking at, and boy, this is interesting because it comes up in students and adults too, recognizing, is that a front page sort of traditional news story, or is that commentary? Is that an opinion piece? So this first piece was written by a student, and it's part of our Student Voices blog. And it's a really delightful piece. And so if you click on that, you can check out the student's point of view to hear her thoughts on climate change. And I guess for PBS NewsHour, there's videos on there too, I should mention, which is kind of a nice feature.
Great, thank you for introducing to our audience PBS NewsHour Extra if they're not familiar. So to launch into this conversation, Victoria, Liz, and I pulled out some research and news that has been circulating in regards to the issue of media literacy in our classrooms. And so many of you may be familiar with the recent research that was released from Stanford's Graduate School of Education, doing a study that included middle school, high school, and college-age students and their ability to differentiate between real news and content that was paid for by an advertiser, also known as a native advertisement. And they found that this was a true struggle for this set of students. And I think that this, because fake news isn't something that's new, the release of this study is really something that alerted the educator community and sort of reinvigorated media literacy as something we need to incorporate into our practice, maybe not just in one unit, but throughout our teaching, from K all the way up to college education. And so again, if you aren't familiar with this research, I urge you to familiarize yourself with this. This other quote Victoria selected, and so I'll let her share why this is also important for our conversation.
Okay, yeah, this is from 538 by their reporter Brooke Orwell, and it says, "We've used this phrase so many times in the past 2 months that it's almost lost meaning, partly because it can mean so many different things. Depending on who you talk to, fake news may refer to satirical news, hoaxes, news that's clumsily framed or outright wrong, propaganda, lies destined for viral clicks and advertising dollars, politically motivated half-truths, and more. And so I guess there's a lot there's a lot to look out for when it comes to fake news, which I think as a teacher, that can be a little overwhelming that to teach this amount of news and media literacy. And so I think it can also be an exciting challenge too. And so I hope you'll view it that way, because I think at the moment it sort of is an overwhelming issue. But I think it's one that can be tackled through knowing the different types of fake news that are out there, having kids understand what's a satire, what's a hoax, when is the story just false, or when did maybe they get some facts wrong. And so I think this is probably a good overall sort of lead into that conversation.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think the next couple of slides where we share some resources and places you can go to find examples of what fake news might be depending on what your students are encountering will be helpful, and lessen the feeling of being overwhelmed that you might be having when thinking about starting this conversation with your students. So this is our agenda for the evening. We're going to start out by sharing types of fake news, much like that were mentioned in that quote, and give you some examples as well as places to go to launch into these discussions. We'll then transition into some really valuable lesson plans for detecting real versus fake news that were written through PBS NewsHour and that Liz also contributed to, and also some pairing of newsela text with PBS NewsHour's video. That's also a great way to pair our resources, and we'll share that with you tonight. And then we'll close with a section on writing like journalists. This is important, I think, because not until students begin to write their own news will they really begin to become metacognitive about the language choices that journalists are making every day in the real and fake news that is published. And so this is a great way for students to take ownership over that language and have practice with it in their own right. And it can be a great way to really make them feel confident that they are prepared to analyze media from many different lenses. And so we're going to start out by addressing the fact that fake news isn't new. In fact, it is something that has been prevalent in American journalism since the United States was formed. And this story comes from one of our library articles published last week. And it includes a tidbit about Benjamin Franklin, who himself actually created a fake issue of a real newspaper back in 1782. The story that he created was meant to scare and produce some fear. And it could be viewed as a hoax, but it could also be viewed as a complete falsehood. I think it's important for students to know this history of journalism, because I think that oftentimes they might think that fake news is a symptom of social media only, and that in fact is not true. Rather, it's a symptom of journalism that has repeated itself for quite a long time. Victoria or Liz, do you have anything to share?
No, that sounds really good. I'm just laughing at the fact that this is going back all the way to the 1700s, and so just though we need to be responsible about the journalism and how we teach students, it's been a long and challenging problem.
Yeah, and I think it also highlights that the issues that we're dealing with today are something that the country and we've struggled with over time. It just seems a little bit more magnified with social media, and they're getting bigger track grounds and audience because of social media.
Yeah, exactly. And so that's something to think about. How has audience and population made the effect of fake news broader and make the impact of it feel greater. Absolutely. And I think that just because Ben Franklin was very influential in the founding of our country as well, we also have to think about the fact that civics plays a role when we bring the conversation of news and media literacy into our classroom. And so, Liz, I'd love for you to share a little bit about how this civic mission of schools has impacted your teaching.
Yes, so the civic mission of schools came up with a report called Guardian of Democracy, and I was first brought to this with the Constitutional Rights Foundation years ago through their work and with CCSS, California Council of Social Studies, and it highlights that they've done multiple researches and they've done studies, and the 6 proven practices of well-rounded civic learning experience. Number 1 was the classroom instruction, instruction in government history laws. And I think sometimes people are afraid of the controversy in the instruction, but you got to bring that stuff in, which goes into the second one, discussion of current events and controversial issues. And I like how newsela frames some of the current events going on, and it does so in a respectful way that the students can access the material with the Lexile levels and questions to frame. And then there's the opportunity for teachers to customize it with our ability as instructors to add questions for our students to address. So you're able to make it work within your curriculum and controversial issues. And again, that fake news is so important. And the whole idea of civics and being a intelligent and well-rounded and critical thinking citizen. And then they go on to talk about service learning. And that might be an interesting aspect for maybe have your students come up with some kind of civic service learning PSA that maybe if you have TVs or a school-wide broadcasting that you could bring up the awareness on that. Then there's extracurricular activities, school governance, simulations of the democratic process. So just how they all bring this into civics and what makes effective instruction.
Great, thank you so much for sharing that. I know that wasn't something I was familiar with before partnering with you, and so I think that this is a great resource to make our educators aware of. Okay, so types, right? The definition of fake news is not necessarily so clear. We all view it from a different perspective that is informed from our experiences as well as our schooling. And so, of course, we are going to share with you some that we think are probably prevalent and might be, your students might be bringing into the classroom and asking questions about. So first, hoaxes. And this actually comes right from an article that we published in December, pretty soon after the election. And this is in reference to Pizzagate, which we know is a hoax. It was a complete falsehood that was a false claim that was created by fake news. And this is an example of something that could have had really serious consequences for the individuals that were involved in the hoax. And so I think that this is an important conversation to have with students because they begin to see the ramifications of fake news and what it can result in when it is brought into mainstream media and has access to a larger audience. Satires. Victoria?
Yeah, satire, it's interesting, trying to get at a larger societal issue, not always politically related, and this is a good example right in front of us, and doing it in a funny or joking manner. And so this man excited to spend weekend back home catching up with old video games from high school. So here's this guy, he is going back to see his family and friends supposedly, but no, actually he's really catching up with, Nintendo and Atari and ColecoVision and any old video system that I just mentioned, which would probably very clearly give who's the audience my age. But I think that it can be hysterical and it can be funny. And I remember The Onion was just getting popular when I was in high school. The guy who is the director of The Onion was just on C-SPAN a couple weeks ago, and it was so interesting because he says he hates more than anything when folks think that satirical stories on The Onion get shared as real news, and then before you know it, and they've run into this problem a few times. But that happens, and so that's why it's like you have to teach our students the meaning of satire and the purpose of it. Again, sort of trying to get at this family, sort of the societal issues of family and what does it mean, like this story is trying to do here.
Yeah. And like you said, it doesn't always have to be political, but obviously sometimes satire is political, and so Victoria can share a little bit more about this as well.
Yes, and Liz, you can come in because I know you were saying your AP government kids asked you if you saw Saturday Night Live the weekend.
Oh, they're always on that one.
So are more than 22 million people. So there you go. If I'm looking at the views, so I mean SNL, they take the jabs at Trump and at Clinton, and so I think with older students, maybe there's certain classes you can certainly show this clip in. But I think that they're going to be hearing about it somehow, and so maybe to talk about the conversation, even if you don't feel comfortable showing an SNL skit in your class, which I totally understand. I don't know. Liz, your kids are older. Do you actually show it to your students, or is it more just discussion before class?
Oh no, I've shown the SNL skits over the years and Comedy Central skits. I also have a media disclosure permission slip on our syllabus. But no, we do talk about them. I do show them, and I think it's important that we don't shy away from the controversial issues. I think we need to model the appropriate way as educators, and it goes back to part of that civic mission of schools, and then also with the work of Diana Hess with Controversy in the Classroom. We need to model it for our students in the appropriate way, and with the guidance and us there to show them the appropriate way, because if we don't, they're just seeing some of the craziness and that they might see on their social media feeds and getting the wrong impression of what to do. So I think it's incumbent upon us as educators to do so in an appropriate and respectful and safe way to do that with our students.
I love that you make one about not shying away from controversial issues. I mean, the school is in many places the perfect place for it. And so certainly have the discussions with administrators and parents and your students about why you're teaching this, but I think it's key.
Absolutely, and an educator just chimed in, Gary, and he shared satire requires the highest levels of ordered thinking, high level ordered thinking combined with prior and content knowledge to be able to access. And he's right. Before you bring satire into your classroom, you do need to do some digging and support your students in understanding what led up to the creation of that. And I think that sometimes for educators, unfortunately, because students bring this into us, if we haven't necessarily prepared that, we have to sort of start off with that conversation and then backtrack. And that can be kind of exciting because it can be a little bit inquiry based, and you can certainly have students begin to pull in research of their own to supplement their understanding of satire. Liz, is there anything that you do to make sure your students have that prior knowledge before they are discussing a satirical piece?
Usually I'll try to bring in stuff that, like, we've laid the baseline of that content area in the classroom before we go there. And I think it's also important to establish, when you're doing these discussions, classroom norms. Like, there's a lovely infographic I use with students, and you can put up in the board, and you talk about appropriate. And I think it's important to remind the students that when you're talking about these issues, you disagree with the student's idea, not a personal attack on a student. And so I think when you're going there and having those discussions, establishing the class culture, respect for each other's voice, and appropriate discussions norms is very important to go over with the students, leading into that, as well as the baseline of the content and general understanding of the material.
Yeah. Okay, so on to native advertisements. This is something that our students interact with through various mediums, but of course, social media plays a role in native advertisements. Basically, ads that have been funded by a specific group with the intent to sell something, but that are released really in narrative form. So our students might not have the background knowledge to consider the fact that this is really a ploy for them to purchase something instead of what they might view it as, which is news about a specific maybe restaurant or product. So I know that this comes up a lot on BuzzFeed, which our students are reading, but then also podcasts are a medium that really has embraced native advertisements. Victoria, I know that you did some research with Content Lee. I'd love for you to share a little bit more about who's invested in native advertisements and why it's important for our students to understand that.
Yeah, I mean the taco show that you just saw on the previous page, that's going to be funny and catch a lot of people's eyes, adults and students. And so to teach kids how to recognize it and why would why would this article be appearing? Well, it's of course to help Taco Bell make money. And so folks like Taco Bell, it's good. Go through the piece and have a good laugh or learn about it, but also know that this is a company that's profiting. The thing about BuzzFeed is they've done such excellent reporting on fake news. Craig Silverman, editor up in BuzzFeed Canada, has really has broken and written about excellent research involving fake news, and so they have a lot to offer. And I think it's great that students check out their work, and also while they're on the website, they'll run into these types of native advertisements, and they'll learn another type of news that's out there, and so that's important.
Yeah, and I think that what this infographic also reveals is that sources that we know to trust are also invested in native advertisements, and I think and native advertising as a form of receiving funds, right, for their products and for their publications. And so I think it's important to reveal this to your students, because I think this is something that they often are not informed of, but to also have the discussion that there isn't necessarily harm in native advertising as long as you are able to recognize it and make an appropriate analysis.
Yeah, that's absolutely a good point. I mean, look, journalism, Liz, to talk about the importance of civics, the idea that there's a free and open press, but these are folks who need to make a living, and their publication needs to make money so that they continue to actually report and do journalistic work. And so this is one thing that's been around for some time, actually, native advertising. It just really helps when it's labeled as such, sponsored content, and it's not always. And so you have to teach your kids about that too. And I think that's helpful.
And then propaganda. I know Victoria is really passionate about this, so I'll let her take over. But this, again, going back to Benjamin Franklin, this is a cartoon.
Okay, so you can tell that. So I switched careers, and I switched into journalism a year ago. And so being in the classroom is actually very recent for me. And clearly I have missed talking about U.S. history and social studies, because there's not one but two references to Ben Franklin. Also, I knew Liz Ramos was going to be on the webinar, and I wanted to impress you, Liz.
You always do.
Good. So this is, I don't know if it's appeared on an AP exam. I'm imagining it has. But if not, something like a Join or Die, and you can see the different states there, and the snake is in different pieces. They actually had two historical purposes for this. One was supporting the British, and actually not supporting the British. So at the French and Indian War, and then during the American Revolution. So the American Revolution, the idea is if this snake unites and the states all get together, it'll turn into a powerful, fierce serpent. And so you better, join with the Yanks and the revolutionary folks, or die. I mean, it's a little, so it's kind of over the top, and you know that it's Ben Franklin, and he's this creative, clever guy. Again, civics value, freedom of expression. This is him expressing himself. This is one of our rights. And so I think it could be fun for kids to use. You probably could find something more contemporary, but there you go. I needed to have my little history nerd out.
Yeah, and image is available on one of our library articles, the Declaration of Independence, and so this is available on newsela for you if you do want to start with something that is historical rather than maybe more recent. All right, so thinking about all those different types that we shared with you, PBS NewsHour is developing an activity to help teachers and students practice this in the classroom. And so Liz is going to share a little bit about this.
Yeah, so one way to get the kids thinking about that is throw out a headline and then start to ask kids, what do you think, and what questions? Think about what might be the angle or intention of this. So this one here is, do millennials have good money habits? Presented by the Bank of America. This article argues that many millennials, people in their mid-20s and 30s, need help financial planning. And so hopefully the kids would have picked up on, sponsored content, which means Bank of America paid for it to be published on the site. So why might they be talking about having good money? While the article could have factually accurate information, remember they are a bank targeting millennials and looking for a possible consumer base down the line. So these are things that kids hopefully would pick up on, or that you could use for a discussion model as you're having this conversation with students. And here's another one, and it's, if I were to run, I'd run as a Republican. They're the dumbest group of voters in the country. They love anything on Fox News. I could lie, and they'd eat it up. I bet my numbers would be terrific. And it's citing that this came from People magazine in 1998. And you could ask the kids, is this credible? Is this real or fake? How would you know? And so the kids could go on and search and try to find information on this. This is a fake story. This story received a lot of social media attention and before Donald Trump's election, but it's a hoax story. Snopes debunked this piece in October of 2015, but yet you saw a lot of people posting these stories, and that's another conversation to have with students along this line. Why are people continuing to do this? What about the amount of fake stories, and talk about echo chamber confirmation bias on real and fake news, and how sometimes that leads to people having these misconceptions. Because Snopes went through and they could not find Trump saying Republicans are the dumbest group of voters in any 1998 People magazine interviews that they had. Okay, here's another one. This one's from the Political Insider. WikiLeaks confirms Hillary sold weapons to ISIS, then drops another bombshell. And so you ask your kids, is this true or not? And hopefully they come to the assumption also that this is a fake news article. Give them time to go on there and then say, what would be the political agenda, or what would be a reason, what might be the interest and motives on this. Let them know that Political Insider is a fake news source known for producing false stories. Check out the hoax debunking website Snopes for information. And that this was also one of those ones that was circulated on social media during the election cycle.
Yeah, absolutely. And so we can see, again, ties back to that understanding of civics, ties back to politics for sure. We have lots of questions coming in, and so I'm going to address some of those right now before we move on to the next section. One thing that was shared, and I would love Liz to maybe share her school's insight into this. I like that you aren't afraid to bring in controversial issues, but we have been told to avoid anything political in the classroom. So I'd love you to be able to share insight into what kind of conversations your school had in regards to that, Liz.
Wow.
Yeah.
I think politics is one of the themes of history. I think it's hard, and even if you're an English teacher, if you're like going through the context of things, I always said you have to be respectful. And I know some schools have different protocols. Like in our AP Gov Facebook group, teachers were saying how they had to get permission slips to show the inauguration, but then some of them saying how they didn't have to do that for Obama's inauguration. So I think you have to be respectful of your school rules, and you don't want to be getting in trouble. But that might be an opportunity for another conversation with your administration, whether it's site or school board, that it's incumbent upon us to do this, but to do so in a respectful way. Luckily, I haven't had an issue with that. I'm very big on, I don't care what your point of view is, let's talk about let's talk about things from a policy point of view. Let's look at it from when we do talk about some of the different social issues in public policy. Okay, kids take a public policy, but I have my kids look at things from both sides. What are the interest groups on the pro side, on the con side? What is the legislation being sponsored by various people across the aisle? What are the court case reasonings on things? I think it's very important that kids, and what are the proposed policy solutions on both sides? I think it's important when you're looking at this kind of stuff to look at it as, here's a policy issue, what is being said on both sides, and what is the fake or propaganda, misleading, and questionable information on both sides. I think it takes a little bit more on us as educators to do our due diligence on sourcing that out. But again, I think it's so important for us to have these conversations with the students. And newsela and PBS have lots of information on there, but then there's also coming up Checkology, which goes through these items in an academic setting. So I think you have to be respectful of your school policies, but that I think we do a disservice to our students, and you just got to be respectful about the opinions and make sure it's not a platform, but more of a policy and looking at an election and looking at the nuances of somebody's proposals.
Yeah.
When you're having that conversation.
I so appreciate that insight, Liz. We have some other questions coming in, and so I'll share those as well. I'm happy to take this one from one of our educators asking, what are your suggestions for ELL or ESL students in understanding satires? I think that satire, as Gary mentioned earlier, satire is certainly something that's difficult for all students to understand. But I would argue that starting with something that is more picture or video based might be a first step. I think with ESL students, you're going to have to unpack some cultural norms about what's funny about this, or what are the roots of this discussion originally. And so I think that it's, when bringing satire into the classroom with ELs, I think it just takes a little bit more of that background knowledge, building that prior knowledge, and then also starting with a visual so that they can talk about what they see in an image and then begin to think about that topic from a more analytical level rather than first entering the conversation of satire maybe through reading can be overwhelming for them. And so I certainly think that there's resources on newsela as well as PBS to start that conversation with ELs. Right, take one more question before we move on to detecting real versus fake news. I think Victoria might be able to share some insight into this one. She said, one of our teachers shared, I hear Snopes mentioned repeatedly on checking information. Is this the best resource to promote students to check first when in doubt about a claim in an internet article?
I think it depends. Snopes started primarily as like full-blown rumors, hoaxes, and then you see them starting to approach like serious political stories. And so I think in terms of, I think they're fine, but there's other more political fake news detection sites out there, such as PolitiFact, which really is going to hone in on politics, like for the election and whatnot. But they're both good. And I'd say related to the ELL question, sometimes introducing non-political stories and then political stories, I think that can often be a good ticket in terms of trying to explain to kids these sophisticated topics.
Great. Okay. So we'll move into the next part of the session. And if your question wasn't answered yet, we will have another Q&A in a little bit. And hopefully we get to share some insights. Okay.
I was gonna say, and I also have been sharing some information on Twitter, like the link to the class discussion norms, which I see is been linked on there. And then I had some other examples of, here's a story and having questions to do with students, and it's framed very nicely that you might want to have questions on the board for students, which helps with the ELL, not only using questions, but also having the questions online or on your projector so that they can see it and they can start processing in their head and kind of frame, because sometimes they need a little bit more of that leeway to kind of gather their thoughts, and they're worried about the language. So I think having questions and letting them to kind of know where it's going gives them that processing and prep time as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Okay, so go ahead and share your wonderful lesson that was included on PBS NewsHour Extra.
Yeah, so
go ahead. I was going to say I get to brag about Liz Ramos because she's the one who wrote it. But go ahead, Liz. You talk about.
Okay, so this one is decoding media bias. So basically, there's a lovely video here, and the kids like watch it, and they have a whole series of them for civics, and they're quick 4 or 5 minute videos, edgy, get the kids' interest, and then lead into lesson. This one's on decoding media bias, where after watching the video, we're talking about media bias and things that kids should be looking at. When we talk about, it used to be above the fold, and now it's placement on your website. Where are stories being placed at? So the kids go to 3 different news organizations, and they go and look, what's the lead story? What's the headline? What other stories are on that homepage? And I tell the kids, and so the kids are taking notes of this, and they're also pay attention to the words. How's it being framed? And as the kids are going to the 3 different news organizations, or you could do it more, it's also helpful if you have split screens, if you could have a split screen app or extension if you're on Chrome. And the kids really start to see how things are framed. They'll notice that, well, this news organization doesn't have this story. This one does. This one, the way they worded the title, this one has it worded differently. And I always tell the kids that the word choice of what somebody is choosing to use is very important. It may give you clues as to a possible bias or angle that the story may take. So the kids kind of go through that, and then I tell the kids, find a story you're interested in, and then they go to the 3 different news organizations, look for a story, read it. What did they notice? What were some common set of facts? Which it's lovely now, because now we have the Obama line from his farewell address where he talks about the need for us to have, I believe he said, we need to have a baseline of facts. So what's the baseline of facts that you had from those different news organizations? What were some facts that one may have chosen to highlight? Which ones were they putting on the bottom, or which ones did they leave out altogether? And have the kids really look at that and have that kind of discussion. So it's just kind of really going in and looking at the news organizations, looking at the stories, looking at the language being used, what's in there and what's not.
Thank you. Vicki, go ahead and add more.
No, allow me a 10-second brag about my colleague here, because she's, it is, part of my job is to go into classrooms, sort of around, I'm in Arlington, Virginia, and so to go in DC and Arlington and Alexandria schools, and the kids, and test out the lesson. And normally I come back if I've written the lesson and I tweak it based on the student feedback and this and that. I have not had to touch this lesson because the kids love it so much. And I've given it to middle and high schooler kids. The video mediocrity with these We the Voters civics videos, they are so good. And Liz, it's just an excellent lesson. And by the way, Liz, you probably remember, like, this was the main thing growing up, and I think even for the first several years of my teaching, that we taught kids was, when you look at a source, what's the bias? Is it left-leaning? Is it right-leaning? And,
Yes.
And now we have like this whole kind of crazy new challenge, which is, by the way, kids, now when you go and look up that news story, the site itself, the website, could be completely made up, and so can all the content in it. And so, boy, talk about the challenges in front of these kids' eyes. This lesson, though, is still that very important lesson as to the bias of the reporter and the news agency itself, and it's really good.
Yeah, and it also leads into a good discussion with the kids about the need for them to rotate around their news sources, not be listening to the same news source all the time. And you can have the opportunity to bring in the whole idea of echo chamber and confirmation bias. So it brings a really rich discussion to the class with the students as well. And I jokingly say, this is why if you're always going to one news website, I tell the kids, you don't want to drink the Kool-Aid. You want to get out and see what else is out there. So that's the little joke I use with that with the Kool-Aid, and they kind of get it because some of them are like, oh, I remember hearing about that, or they hear the parents saying, and so they understand it. Sometimes we just need to explain that, but it really does give you opportunity to lead into those conversations about echo chamber and confirmation bias as well.
And I know time is winding down, and I hope that we get to this in the webinar. But in case we don't, Newsela has the best thing in the world called text sets, and they'll be on one topic, such as the media, and they'll be from multiple news sources. So I think you guys are doing such an excellent job. I know a ton of teachers who love the text sets, and I certainly used them when I was in the classroom. I think they're great for providing multiple perspectives.
I think we'll get there, Victoria. And yeah, those text sets certainly are a great way to build background knowledge and really have students dive deep into one specific issue. Liz, thank you so much for sharing. I want everyone to know that this lesson plan is linked in that handout that you could download as a part of this webinar. So feel free to access that through there. Liz is really active on Twitter, and she has been posting links tonight to a lot of the resources you guys are asking for. Also, my colleague has been putting into the chat some of the resources you've been sharing, so make sure you're checking that out. I also just want to share that a lot of educators mentioned that another great way to address satire with second language learners is to start with a native language. And of course, that can certainly be a way to bring that into your classroom as well, satire from their native language, whether it be Spanish or Mandarin, etc. This is something from the News Literacy Project. This is an organization that does some great work that I know Liz partners with, and so I'll let her share this. This is something that I know a lot of you have been asking about, and I think will lead you in the right direction for getting this conversation going in your classroom. So go ahead and share a little bit about this, Liz.
Okay, in addition to PBS and Newsela, this is like another one of my fangirl faves. Techology, the News Literacy Project, they have a couple of infographics, and I think there's another slide with one, and I also tweeted them out as well. And just ways that kids can, you could throw it up on the screen, you could print it out for the kids, and just things that they need to be taking a look at when they're looking at fake news, like what's the byline, what's the credible source. So like the 5 W's and 1 H, when you're like doing that mediocrity is a nice way to bring that in and have them look at stuff. How do you fact check? So they have the infographic here on fact checking presidential candidates and 5 easy steps. This not only works for when we had the candidates and the debates and stuff, but this goes for any kind of article, any kind of content. So these are also really, really great, and they have a curriculum set called Checkology that they're taking free signups for right now. So if you go to the checkology.org, you can sign up, and I sent the link out on Twitter. That it's really good, and it goes through the different topics like Victoria was mentioning as well. They have a lovely set of curriculum. They have a really nice way to break it down with students, give them examples, and then they match it up. Is this bias? Is this advertisement? And it's really, really rich to go through. And they have all the examples like right there with you laid out too. And so these are just nice things to blend. Like I like blending the news literacy and the PBS and Newsela and just coming back to that with the students.
Yeah, and one of the teachers wrote in this is that this conversation is great. How can we think about bringing this in for younger students? And I think that this might be a great tool to use, but rather than having students maybe doing it independently eventually, this would be something you would do as a whole class. I can see that using this Checkology rubric and maybe doing a read aloud or a shared read of one of the resources on Newsela, or even viewing one of the videos on PBS NewsHour and going through and asking these questions of a source together, practicing maybe with a source that you know isn't fake but could be fake, and then transitioning and putting some more difficult material in front of the students would be a great to use this.
Yeah, and it's also a great step that why not jigsaw? You give your kids table groups different stories and have them go through that, and then kind of like do a round robin at the end. And it's great to listen to the conversations. I love going around listening to the conversations my students are having when they're doing these kind of things. It's really interesting and hilarious at times.
Yeah, and newsela has a great tech set called The Phenomenon of Fake News. And we have, right on one of those articles, we have a pro teacher resource available for teachers that sets something up like this, like setting up a bunch of computers with different fake pieces of fake news, and having students go through in groups like a gallery walk. And they could use this questionnaire to sort of ask questions of the source, and then come together as a whole class and do it and debrief as to how that went. I think is another great way to bring that into the classroom. I know as a former elementary school teacher, movement had to be an integral part of all my lessons so that I didn't lose my kids in the process of the learning. So another thing, and Victoria can also share, a great way to bring newsela and PBS NewsHour into your classroom together is by pairing. We know that pairing text is something that is practiced a lot in literacy instruction. A lot of times teachers do it with fiction and nonfiction, or sometimes with just fiction and just nonfiction. But it's a great way to think about other media forms as well. How can we open up to include a news article from newsela and pair it with a video that addresses a very similar topic? Students then are able to understand concepts from two different mediums, and also learners of all kinds can really access this type of material. And so this is a great way. This article talks about Facebook and Google dealing with the aftermath of their sites publishing fake news, or rather the consumers of their sites publishing fake news, and that the proliferation of that fake news, especially on Facebook, led Facebook to start to have conversations about what their role was in making sure that the proliferation of fake news was less rampant on their site. And so, of course, this PBS video, Victoria can share a little bit more about it, but it sort of carries the conversation that starts in this article and takes it a little bit further as to the ways in which Facebook has decided they will combat this from their perspective.
Yeah, the other one, factcheck.org just popped into my head too. I can't remember if that's one of the sites that Facebook has teamed up with for they're bringing in sites, fact-checking sites to try to lessen the fake news that's appearing. And so you like that one, Liz, factcheck.org?
Yes.
Okay.
That's one of the ones that we used a lot during debates and in class to go fact check.
Yeah. And so it's good. Mark Zuckerberg was in a little maybe denial about some of the fake news and the amount of it that was appearing on his site. And, to his credit, the reality set in, and I think some Facebook folks there really helped him see that too, as well as the public. And so they're taking action, and so we'll see how that goes. But we need to give our students these skills too. And then, by the way, that's an activity they can do. They can go on Facebook and learn how to flag stuff or whatever. I mean, there's so many neat things. By the way, that news literacy project, the looking for news stories or headlines that are all in caps, that's a good one for elementary kids, for them to sort of see that. I like that. And the memes, they love those memes.
Oh my gosh.
That's trouble. You have to watch out for those memes.
Yeah.
They can be great, but they can be, okay, but I digress.
Well, I mean, I'm just here, and I'm so excited for you to share your lesson plan that's available to download. And I know that newsela has taken some of your content and made it available at 5 different reading levels for students. And so go ahead and share about this lesson, Vicki.
This lesson has a lot of what we talked about. We do reference that Top 10 Technology News Literacy Project. All these organizations, I mean, they're doing really nice work. And so we have activities to go with how your students can detect fake news using these resources. I mean, look, yes, I work for PBS NewsHour, but I was a school teacher for 13 years. And what I do now and what I did then involves bringing in multiple sources, multiple resources, and so that's going to be key to do. So there's videos here, and students can look under these. Boy, this Pope Francis. I had to tell a couple of my last name is Pasquantonio, so Catholic family. I had to tell a few of them, look, Pope did not endorse Donald Trump. I know you might love Donald Trump, or not like him, but just know the facts that Pope Francis never endorsed Donald Trump. And so that was a popular fake news story. So the kids go through the story and they find out how it was fake. And so that, and they sort of, do hands-on figuring it out. And so that's one to check out.
Great. And again, just another pair. This is a little bit more political, but again, can be a great way for you to use our sources together. Okay, so I know we have lots of questions coming in and we're closing in. I'm just going to share a few more resources with you and then we'll stay on the line for some more questions. But this conversation so far has been really great and I hope that you all are getting a lot out of it. So as Victoria mentioned, newsela has text sets. In addition to the 8 articles we publish a day, we also curate articles by subject area or topic and create sets so that teachers can have one place to go to connect several articles around a topic in their classroom. It's also a great way to incorporate student choice into your literacy instruction so that students could pick and choose what articles from a set they might be interested in diving a little bit deeper into. And so we have several text sets that address media literacy, but this one in particular is our most recent, addressing the phenomenon of fake news. And what is even more cool about this set is that it links out to newsela's media literacy toolkit. And so that you can access that by clicking right through that link on the text set, and it's a host of resources and activities for you to do in your classroom. It also includes a Q&A about media literacy in the classroom from our content team here at Newsela, as well as a recording of our webinar last week with them. So there's many resources in that media literacy toolkit, and it's also linked in the handout. And so this gives you a flavor of what some of the articles within this set, what they address. But in particular, I'll stop here because I'd love to take your questions. But this, as a result of the Newsela Media Literacy Week, we started publishing pro-teacher resources on news articles, and we did something different for Media Literacy Week. We actually made 5 connected resources, and so they're available on these 5 articles that you see on the screen. And what they do is it introduces your students to a project in which they become the journalists. They are tasked in the beginning with understanding and assessing the language of fake news and doing some of their own research into credible sources, and then they come up with a topic or theme for their newspaper, and they will become those journalists themselves, either crafting a real or a fake news story. After they go through that process, some writing and editing with their peers, they will form a newspaper panel, either from another class or from another set of teachers, and have them read that newspaper without telling them what is real and what is fake. And then after that panel assesses their newspaper, they'll share their findings, and then the students will facilitate a discussion around some of the editorial choices they made, and also address any basically if they tricked their audience. And so it's a great way to sort of build community around this issue in your classroom, and it's also a great way to have your students become really metacognitive and own the language of journalism, of the news, whether it be real or fake. And so those pro-teacher resources are available right on those articles that were on the last screen. And the way you access them is by expanding this navy blue box. If you are not a pro user, you can still access these. We have left these open up until the inauguration. And if you start a pro trial, you can also access all these resources. And these resources will also be published in the Media Literacy Toolkit by the end of the week. So that's another place to access these. I want to thank Victoria and Liz for joining us, and we are going to address some more questions, and then we will close with our final teacher poll. If you have to leave us, feel free. I know that the time is technically up, and so if you do have to leave, you will receive a recording in the follow-up email, and so you can go ahead and listen to the end if you have to miss out. And so these questions are really coming in, and I'm excited to get some of these out into our discussion to close.
Nice. Okay. Stay on the line, everybody.
Yeah, for sure. I love the fact that recent newsela articles have paralleled the current political issues. My class discusses daily the recent vote nominee as well as Donald Trump, and the news articles give us a springboard into our government class and our democratic policies. My students have displayed an enormous interest this school year in our own government. I would love for Liz to share how a little bit more about how these conversations have gone in her class.
It's been great. We've had the civics conversations have gone really, really well. Again, there may have been like sometimes where a student was a little bit more passionate and maybe bringing in some other stuff, and you just need to be respectful about let's redirecting them and saying like if you want to have a side conversation, you're aware before or after school. So I think that's one way. I know because referencing like a concern earlier that teachers had, but again, it just goes back to like the norms and just watching what your kids are saying and just reminding them, okay, sometimes you need a little redirect. I think that's an important thing to remember when you're having your conversations with your students.
Yeah. And then this question is coming in for Victoria. How would students know which sources have a history of posting fake news?
I think that's such a question. So there's now, in the last couple of months, especially, there has been a huge amount of articles written on that very question. Because how do you know? I need to, how do you know who to trust? How do you know what's real and what's not? You mentioned that you had a webinar on this last week, and it's a similar topic tonight. And so I would look up webinars and Twitter chats and find out what teachers are talking about, suggestions there. But I would also, I would look up news stories from the New York Times, from PBS NewsHour, from CNN. I mean, I would try to bring in a wide variety of folks on this actual topic. A lot of this stuff, of course, you can find out the places that have had problems, and we've all sort of run into problems in some ways in terms of what we do for our job, whether it's a student having trouble and on a test and going about plagiarizing, or whether it's a news organization getting the story wrong intentionally or unintentionally. And so this is in writing, and it's out there on the internet. And I would say to research this very topic, because you'll find really a wonderful resource and lots of good stories.
Yeah, and I love the idea of turning to your educator community to have these discussions, to sort of find more resources. I know tonight I see a lot of people are sharing many strategies that they use, and that can be a great place to think about where to start. And then I think we'll close with this question, and either of you can jump on this. How do we deal with kids whose sole source of information is YouTube, and they believe everything they hear?
Oh, goodness.
Yeah, I can start with sharing a tidbit that one of our journalists shared last week, which was in journalism school, they, in the first couple of days, they ask you, if your mother told you she loved you, like, would you believe her, and what sources would you check? And so that does sort of make all of us a little bit wary, like, can we trust anything? But again, I think that the theme of what we've been discussing tonight is that questioning, and that very concept of asking questions and being in conversation with what we're reading is so important. And I think that that's introducing that idea, maybe not so harsh of a way, as it is introduced in journalism school, could be a great way to start the conversation with students who are at the, because of their experiences, at the moment believe everything they hear.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys have any other insights to share.
I think it also goes back to corroboration. Like I had a kid yesterday show me, Miss Ramos, I want to show you something, and he had a video with part of Jeff Sessions' confirmation hearing, but it wasn't from like CNN or MSNBC or C-SPAN or anything. It was, I can't remember the name, and I looked at who it was from, and I'm like, well, wait a minute. And the guy goes into a monologue first, and he's like, oh, but then here's the part I want you to listen to. I'm all, no. Like, look at the whole thing of what you're listening to, and a lot of people like splice and are very creative with that. So I tell the kids, like, if it's not like from a reputable sourcing, even on YouTube, a lot of people can clip things and a lot of the clips can be taken out of context. I'm all, you want to go back and see the larger picture of things. So I tell the kids, don't just look at a little clip. Yeah, it may be damning what they're saying, but look at the whole context, because a lot of things are like clipped and you're not hearing the whole story. And they might not have even made that comment about that particular topic. So I think that, and going back to sourcing, whether it's a YouTube video or something else I've seen on Twitter, if it sounds kind of outlandish, go on to Google it, Google the content or a couple of keywords, see what's coming up. If you're not having a reputable news organization come up and with stories on that and switch it over to news, I'd be very questionable of that story or video sourcing.
Liz, or several sources. I mean, you can go and not just the top 5 or 10 certainly that come up on Google. We all know that that's sort of a no-no. It can be great and correct, and other times it can mislead us. And so several sources on the one subject. You know, growing up, we had like 3 news networks. ABC, I mean, I speak for myself, but I think Liz too. ABC, yes. And then, you know, Fox started to come in somewhere around my middle school. So then we had another network, and now look where Fox is. But if you think ABC and CBS, if we were told to go to all 3 of those networks, same with the Washington Post, New York Times, Wall Street Journal, on the same topic, you're going to find different information. A lot of the information is going to be the same, but you'll find little bits of differences with each of those articles. And I think that's key. I think asking for a certain number of sources is always a good idea.
Yeah, and I'll just add also looking into what the author has written previously can be a really helpful way in understanding, are they an expert on this topic? And that's true, could be true of YouTube as well, because some things that are published on YouTube can be quite informative how-tos that are valuable. And you can definitely look into a person's history of publication and realize, are they someone who is knowledgeable of this topic and is really approaching it with a level of expertise, or is this just an opinion or a hoax or propaganda, as we addressed tonight? All right, well, a lot of you did stay on the line, and I really appreciate it. I know as a former teacher, I'm sure you guys are super busy. I'll launch into our final poll about what strategy or resource that was mentioned tonight do you think you'll use in your classroom? And as I launch that poll, I just want to thank all of you who joined in tonight, and I also want to thank Victoria and Liz for spending the time to chat with all of us as well.
Oh, that's great. And I love the topic, information overload. Like I was saying, we had like CBS and ABC, and now we have the internet, and though it's overwhelming, there's so many good resources out there to find and learn. And yes, YouTube has wonderful things on it. And so I think that information overload, it can be overwhelming, but I think it can be pretty awesome too. I mean, Liz, remember, like, we had Scholastic, we had Highlights magazine, and we had the library, you know, that place called the library, and then those 4 things. Now these kids, look at the millions of sites. We have newsela. Look, I mean, it's awesome.
Yes, you tell the kids card catalog, they look at you like you're crazy.
Yeah. So everyone is eager in regards to what we shared tonight, and it seems like teachers are going to be trying many different things in order to address this topic. I know that there are so many questions, and we didn't get a chance to answer all of them, so I just wanted to offer up my email address. I'm going to send it to everyone, but it's newsela.com. Feel free to write me there with any of your questions, and I will certainly share any questions that I think are relevant for Liz and Victoria with them as well. Again, thank you so much for joining in this evening. And if you are active on social media as a way to connect with your educator community, I encourage you to join PBS NewsHour's vibrant community as well as Newsela's, and definitely follow myself and Victoria and Liz on Twitter, because we're constantly sharing out resources with our educator communities. Again, thank you so much for joining in, and have a wonderful evening, and good luck addressing media literacy in your classroom.
Thank you, Emily. You're a wonderful host.
Okay, great. Thank you so much, everyone. Good night.